The restaurant had always been loud at night. Silverware clinking, soft jazz floating through the air, wealthy people laughing beneath crystal chandeliers while expensive wine shimmered in their glasses. But hidden behind the calm smile of one quiet waitress was a woman with a past no one could imagine. Her name was Mechelle, a proud African-American woman in her 30s. Graceful, intelligent, and strong. Years earlier, she had lived two very different lives. By day, she worked as a compassionate nurse, saving lives, comforting patients during their darkest hours. By night, she was something entirely different. A corporate fraud investigator and lawyer feared by corrupt executives across the country. She had exposed embezzlement rings, uncovered illegal property schemes, and helped destroy billion-dollar fraud operations, hiding behind polished suits and fake smiles. But after years of stress, betrayal, and endless courtroom battles, Mechelle wanted something simple, something quiet. So she disappeared from that world. No designer suits, no courtrooms, no investigations. Just a small black uniform, a serving tray, and long, peaceful nights working quietly at one of the city's most famous restaurants. For months, nobody knew who she really was. To the staff, she was simply the kind waitress who always stayed late to help clean tables, the woman who smiled softly and never bragged about herself. She never spoke about her degrees, her victories, or the dangerous men she once investigated. And for the first time in years, she felt peace. Until the night Mr. Wilson Smith walked through the doors. The entire restaurant changed the moment he arrived. Conversations lowered. Managers straightened their ties. Wealthy investors rushed to shake his hand. Wilson Smith was one of the most powerful property tycoons in the country, famous for luxury skyscrapers, television interviews, and billion-dollar business deals. But Mechelle knew another side of him, a darker side. She had once reviewed files connected to his company years ago, files filled with suspicious payments, hidden accounts, and fraudulent land deals buried beneath layers of legal protection. But she stayed silent. Tonight, she only wanted to do her job. The manager assigned Mechelle to serve Wilson Smith and his guests. She remained calm and professional as she carried expensive meals and crystal glasses to the table. Everything went smoothly until the iced tea. As Mechelle approached the table, her foot caught the edge of a loose rug. The tray tilted. A few drops of iced tea splashed across Wilson Smith's designer jacket. The restaurant froze. Wilson Smith slowly stood from his chair, his face burning red with anger. "You clumsy idiot," he shouted across the room. "Do you even know how much this jacket costs? People like you should never work in places like this." The room became silent. Every eye turned toward Mechelle, but Wilson Smith kept going. "I want her fired immediately," he barked. "Get this embarrassing woman out of my sight." For months, Mechelle had swallowed her pride. For months she stayed quiet. But tonight, something inside her finally broke. Slowly, she placed the iced tea jug down onto the table. Then she stood perfectly straight. Her eyes locked onto Wilson Smith, and suddenly, the timid waitress disappeared. The entire atmosphere changed. In a calm, cold voice, she spoke. "Mr. Wilson Smith, I know exactly who you are." The tycoon's expression shifted. Mechelle stepped closer. "I know about the hidden offshore accounts, the false property valuations, the fake redevelopment contracts, and the families forced out of their homes through fraudulent acquisitions." The investors at the table stared in shock. Wilson Smith's face turned pale. Mechelle continued, "I spent years as a corporate fraud investigator and attorney. I reviewed multiple cases connected to your companies." Now the entire restaurant was silent. Even the piano player had stopped. Mechelle began listing details, dates, shell corporations, lawsuits quietly buried through settlements, one after another. She exposed pieces of a world Wilson Smith thought nobody remembered. Phones quietly appeared beneath tables. People began texting, recording. Some investors slowly stood from their seats and walked away from Wilson Smith without saying a word. The billionaire's confidence crumbled before everyone's eyes. And then, Mechelle's cell phone began vibrating non-stop. Messages flooded her screen. Television stations, news reporters, corporate law firms, private investigators. Everyone wanted her. Everyone suddenly remembered who she was. Wilson Smith stood speechless while his empire began collapsing in real time around him. Moments later, the restaurant manager rushed toward her nervously. "Mechelle, come quickly," he whispered. Inside the office, a wealthy investor stood waiting beside the desk. Without hesitation, the eme by boton. Inside the office, a wealthy investor stood waiting beside the desk. Without hesitation, the man handed her a blank check. "You can write any amount," he said. "Money is not a problem. I want you working for me immediately." Mechelle looked down at the check. Then she looked back through the office window at her co-workers, all staring at her in amazement. People expected her to become powerful again, rich again, famous again. But Mechelle was tired of greed, tired of corruption, and tired of chasing money. Slowly, she tore the blank check in half. The room gasped. Then she smiled softly and said, "I already have the skills to make millions. Right now, all I want is peace and quiet." She picked up her coat, walked toward the exit, and paused beneath the glowing lights of the restaurant one final time. Then Mechelle looked back and quietly said, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd really like to go home and finally get some rest." And with that, the woman everyone underestimated walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind a silent room full of people who would never forget her name again.